Stacked septum, stacked ears, stacked piercings, opposed to stretching. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 60. So you might want to stick around. For those that are new here at the Body Piercing and Tattooing channel, welcome to the channel. Hope you're finding the videos helpful, useful, and generally entertaining, I guess. But you might not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So what we're going to talk about today is most commonly done with septum piercings. At least that's what's popular right now. This has been done with ear piercings and pretty much any piercing that can be stretched. This method can be used. In some cases, it isn't as practical as it is with septums and ears as it is with other piercings. Like, for example, stretching a PA with stacked jewelry isn't really very practical because it tends to be a little uncomfortable. So what the biggest difference is that instead of just putting a larger piece in there and slowly increasing the thickness of the jewelry over a long period of time, you are just adding another piece of jewelry to that piercing and slowly stretching it. The effect will be different from the standpoint of more traditional, like, non-stacked stretching. I don't know how to describe it. You're going to have, unlike if you're just stretching and putting plugs in and so forth, we're going to have an almost perfectly round circle when you remove the jewelry. With these, it's going to create more of an oval circle. If you try to switch back and forth between the two, it can get a little complicated because even though you may have the thickness, you're not going to have the height. Does that make sense? To put in an extremely large piece. Now, let's go on to the pros, the advantages, things that make you go, yeah, hey, I might want to do this. Starting with number one, a very unique look. You're not going to get the same look that you can with just normal stretching out with just one single piece of jewelry. You can make multiple combinations of different styles, different materials, different sizes to create kind of a very unique and different look that is 100% your look. Now, you're not going to get that as much with going from one plug to another plug or one ring to another ring. Yes, you can change the style of them each stretch, but you're not going to have that same effect. It's not going to be that unique. Number two, less jewelry retirement. Anybody that stretched their ears or any other part of the body usually has a large collection of jewelry that they no longer wear. And the reason why is because when you stretch piercings, the old jewelry tends to not have a new home. Unless you're just doing piercings, multiple, and stretching multiple piercings, you end up with a large collection of stuff you never wear. Kind of like, it'd be like a large collection of skinny jeans, I guess. Hey, I'm a dude, I even have them. That are just sitting around for, if your piercing shrinks, I guess. But the reality is in most cases, you never wear that jewelry again. With this method, where you're just adding a ring after ring after ring, you are never really just retiring jewelry. In fact, you're just buying new ones and adding it to it. So you don't have as much laying around in that jewelry box as you would if you go through like a more traditional, normal stretch, like single-piece stretch. Number three, after what I just said, you're probably already came to this conclusion, but it's a little cheaper. It's more cost-effective, I guess, is a good way of putting it. You're not buying, a pair of $80 plugs that you wear for maybe 6 months, and then you outstretch them, and then you're putting them in a box and never to be used again or seen again. With this situation where you're just adding additional rings, there's not as much waste, so to speak. So it's cheaper, more cost-effective. Number four, this kind of goes back to the unique look, but there's a large variety of things you can do with this. There is probably, I wouldn't even know how to start to name or count out the number of just titanium hinge rings that are on the market today. Hundreds upon hundreds of different styles, different settings, different and then you add size to that. So there's just this huge, massive amount of different combinations you can do to get that look that you want. And number 5, if you're one of those people that likes the circular look, but you also kind of want to stretch it, do something fun with it, you're not going to have to deal with huge rings. One of the issues with captive bead rings, seamed rings, thread or hinge rings, all of them, is as you get into thicker gauges, because it is much more difficult to get that thicker jewelry to do those tight turns, the width of the jewelry greatly increases. That's why it's really easy to find like a 14 gauge 1/4 inch barbell, circular barbell, but you're going to be hard pressed to find a 4 gauge one. It's just the way that material is and the way that shape would be ridiculously hard to do. I don't even think you could do that and leave space in the center. Well, I guess you'd have to figure out some way. It just sounds really complicated. So most manufacturers will slowly phase out those smaller widths as you get thicker. So, and the other disadvantages with rings or large rings is eventually you get to a point around 0 gauge or in some cases 00 where you just cannot find circular jewelry that's that big anymore. And then you have all this weight. Rings, I don't know. I haven't really sat down and kind of measured it out, but I would guess that having 10 titanium rings inside your nostril may be a little heavy, or your septum, but probably not quite as heavy as a 00 half-inch ring, or not half-inch ring, inch ring. Well, with that out of the way, let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that make you go, nope, not for me. Number 1, the piercing hole. I've kind of alluded to this already. The piercing hole is going to change shape. It's going to be more oval or stretched out, kind of like a NASCAR track or a horse track. It's not going to be perfectly circular, which means that even though you may have stretched, you measure the thickness of all those rings, and you're like, wow, I'm at 3/4 of an inch. The reality is, if you try to stick a 3/4 inch tunnel or plug in there, it ain't gonna fit. The reality is you're probably closer to maybe a 0. So you have to understand that this piercing is going to form differently than it would if you were just using one piece of jewelry over and over again. That's perfectly circular. Number 2, in some cases, the process is a little bit slower. It can be kind of time-consuming. It seems like I've talked to people that say that they've done both, and they found that this was faster than the other. But when you start doing the timeline, sometimes this process takes a little bit longer, mainly because you don't have that heavy weight jump that you do with like single jewelry, especially back in the good old days when all we had was stainless steel. Number 3, removing the jewelry can take a really long time. Since you're dealing with multiple pieces of jewelry, if you have 12, hinge rings in your septum or your ear, that's you got to remove each of them individually. It's not take one thing and take one thing out. It's going to take some time to remove that stuff, and it's going to take some time to put them back in. Another thing to consider is if you have any type of medical issues or something where you need to put in maybe a glass retainer, you might have a hard time finding something that fits correctly. Number 4, talked a little bit about this, but it can add a little bit of weight depending on what materials you're using. It's not uncommon, especially with ear piercings, to have like a very loopy type ring or lobe with rings hanging off the bottom. That's in part because of weight, and that's in part because the person probably stretched up a lot larger than that and then put in the stacks. Number 5, and it comes back to weight again, headaches. If you put enough weight pulling on the front of your septum, it's going to give you sinus headaches. And not everybody, but a lot of people. It can really affect that tension right here, and that can cause some issues and make it very uncomfortable to wear a large number of pieces of jewelry inside your septum. So headaches would be the other thing, especially with septums. One final thing that I didn't really talk about is tearing. because you have this very thick or very large hole, and you have, especially with earlobes, and you have this very thin wire, there is a possibility of one of them getting caught individually and tearing through and destroying the whole piercing. So keep that in mind. Isolation with these is a good idea even well after they've healed. Now, if you had a large ring in there or a plug or something that's solid, it's going to be less likely to do that because there's too much resistance. When you stick with these thinner gauge jewelry like 16 gauge and 18 gauge, it's going to be more easy for that. There's less resistance, so it'd be easier for it to tear through. Now let's talk a little bit about how it's done. There's various different methods, but this is the one that I've suggested to clients and had clients use in the past. The first thing is you want to heal the piercing, of course, and then stretch it out to about 12 gauge or heal it at 12 gauge. 12 gauge or 10 is kind of a good place to start because it gives you a little bit of room to put in some larger jewelry to start off with. You can put in multiple rings and not really do a lot of damage. Once the piercing is seasoned enough and it's gotten to the point where it's loose enough, like it would be if we were going to stretch to 8 gauge, then add a 16 and 18 gauge ring. Once, let that stay in there for a couple of months, and then once that gets to the point where it's loose enough where you can easily place another thing in there, take the 18 gauge ring out, replace it with a 16 gauge ring. Give it a month or so and continue to do that. Basically, I suggest each time you stretch, put the thinner piece of jewelry in, leave it in for a couple of months, then put the thicker piece in. The longer you wait, the more time you give between these stretches, the stronger that tissue is going to be, and the less likely you are to cause damage. Now, I'm going to leave this in comments, but I wrote it here on the screen, I guess. Maybe there. I'll try. This is a rundown of how thick each gauge is. It's important to consider this because regardless, it's going to have that same width. If you kind of start adding up each ones, you can come up with combinations. They're going to kind of match what you have and thus not overstretch or cause damage and have to step back and start over again. So I really suggest do your research, pay attention to how thick the two of those are next to each other, and don't just start cramming things in there. And kind of the reason why I suggest doing the stepping thing where you go from 16, one 16 and then an 18, and then two 16s, and then two 16s and an 18, is you're only increasing that a small amount. For example, an 18 gauge ring and a 16 gauge ring is going to have a thickness of 2.8 millimeters. Two 16 gauge rings will have a thickness of 3.2 millimeters. It's a little bit of a jump. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it would make a difference. And it shouldn't hurt when you stretch. There's a misconception that a lot of people have is that it's partly painful, and that's normal. That isn't normal. It shouldn't hurt because usually when you feel pain, you've caused trauma. Well, that's all I have to say on stacking today. I hope you found the video helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see if your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, and check out this other video.